Hi everyone, my name is Richmond Owusun Team, and in this video series, I'm going to explain to you, or we are going to study how to use SQL structured query language. Now, the video series will be divided into two main sections. So, the first section will be the theory, and then the second section will be the practice. Now, from my little experience, I've come to realize that most people just tend to go straight to the practice where they begin to run SQL and they begin to learn how to use SQL without getting a firm understanding of what SQL is, how it is being used, why it is being used, and why it exists in the first place. So, in this video, we'll take the first part, which is the theory, and then we'll go ahead with the second part, which is the practice. Now, by the end of this section, you should be able to understand what SQL is. You should be able to understand why businesses use SQL. You should be able to understand what databases are and what database management systems are. You should be able to know the different SQL languages. You should be able to know the SQL query structure and then the rules that applies when we are writing SQL syntax. Now, before we even start, let's just take a look at this situation. Now, imagine you work for a bank or you work for a warehouse, and then your manager randomly asks you this question as a banker. So your manager asks you which customer deposits more than 50,000 this month. Now, when it happens like that, it means you are going to go through your entire database or your entire system just to be able to find out the number of customers that have deposited more than 50,000. Or if you work in an e-commerce section, or if you work in a retail and your branch manager comes and wants to know the highest sales that has been made during the day or during the week or during the month, it becomes quite complex, because what it means is that you have to go through the logs one after the other just to be able to pinpoint the highest sales that has been made. The same thing also happens when you are working in a warehouse or in inventory, and you are supposed to be monitoring the stocks that are about to run out. And actually, that is where the use of SQL comes in. Just bear in mind that in modern work, we no longer go with the manual way of handling affairs. So everything has been digitalized, where we have softwares, we have systems. When you go to the banks, they have softwares that record deposits and receipts, then deposits and withdrawals. When you go to retail shops, they have softwares that are able to record sales that comes every time. And because of these things, it has made data collection very easy. But however, we need a system that allows us to be able to help us retrieve data much faster and much easier, and that is where SQL comes in. So the main challenge here is modern organizations have thousands of customers, so it is no longer the situation where your customers are only in a particular country. Now you get customers coming in from so many countries. Modern organizations do millions of transactions. Modern organizations have tons of historical data, and this makes manual selection almost impossible. Therefore, businesses need a solution that will enable them to be able to retrieve data much faster, and that is where again the SQL comes in. So why SQL exists? Now, SQL is created to help businesses find information quickly. Bear in mind that businesses, because of the softwares that they use to store data, businesses have a database, and in a database is a collection of related data. So there are so many information or so many data that has been stored in this database. Millions of transactions, millions of rows, billions of records, so much to the extent that finding information becomes very tedious and takes much time. Therefore, with the use of SQL, you are able to find information faster. With the use of SQL, you are able to generate reports faster. And once you are able to generate reports faster, it makes decision making also faster, and then it also allows managers or businesses to be able to manage large databases. Now, supposing there was nothing like SQL, then it means you need to be going through your database one after the other, just looking for a particular decision. And in our current business environment, time is of the essence. So we cannot spend 1 week or 2 weeks making a report. By the time we finish making the report, maybe our competitor might have moved past us. So generating these reports and making decisions much faster is very important to continue to remain competitive in the business world. And that is where the SQL comes in. So SQLs assist businesses like almost every industry. So regardless of the industry where you find yourself, when you go to the banks, they use SQL. When you go to the hospitals, they use SQL to be able to retrieve patients' data. When you go to the universities, they use SQL to be able to retrieve data concerning students. When you go to retail stores, they use SQL to be able to generate weekly and monthly reports. When you go to the government institutions, they use SQL to be able to generate information or generate economic data or economic reports. Insurance companies do the same. So a host of organizations or a host of industries, all of them employ the use of SQL, and it has become the norm to use these days. Therefore, as professionals or as business people or as workers, having no knowledge about SQL is very dangerous, especially at this point in time where most businesses are transitioning from manual methods or manual way of doing business to more digital or to more automated sections. If you don't have any idea about SQL, it's very dangerous. Now, the main question that comes is, what is SQL? So SQL is just an abbreviation for structured query language, and it's a language that is used to communicate with relational databases. Now, a database is an organized digital collection of structured information. So just see a database like a library, but this time around, this library is found on your computer. So look at this situation. If you enter a library, there are so many books in a library, and if you are looking for a particular book, even though the library might be divided into sections, it will take you a long time to look for this book. So SQL is working in here like a librarian, where if you are looking for a particular book, you go to the librarian and the librarian is able to pinpoint exactly where the book can be located. So it's the same thing, that is the same way that SQL also works. So SQL, they simply work behind all our systems. All systems that collects data, SQL works behind them, or more or less like SQLs are tied to all of these systems that work together. So with SQL, you'll be able to retrieve data. With SQL, you'll be able to add new data. With SQL, you'll be able to update existing data. With SQL, you'll be able to delete unwanted data, and then you'll be able to also manage databases. Now, SQL is a programming language, so it can be used behind most softwares, like I'm saying. So behind banking softwares, hospital information systems has SQL in it, payroll systems has SQL embedded in it, accounting softwares have SQL embedded in it, and e-commerce websites also have SQL embedded in it. So just take a look at these examples. If you work in any of these industries with no knowledge in SQL, it's going to be very dangerous for you, like in the near future. Just have an idea about it. Just know some basic syntaxes that you will need to work with. You don't need to know the entire software inside out. Most of the time, because we are business executives, we'll be using the software to retrieve information from the database. So just be able to understand how we can use SQL to retrieve data from the database. That is very important. Now, SQL, because it's a programming language, it is divided into, there are 5 main languages here. So we have the DDL, we have the DML, DQL, DCUL, and then TCL. Now, the DDL, which is data definition language, this one, it is used in creating data. It is used to alter, that means makes changes. It is used to drop means to delete data permanently. And then when it comes to truncate is like you are just deleting it temporary. Now, We have DML, which is data manipulation language, and data manipulation language, we use it to insert data, we use it to update data, we use it to delete records. The other three languages that we have are the data query language, we have data control language, and then transaction control language. Now, we are not going to look at all of these 5 different languages. We are going to focus on the data query language. And the data query language, basically, we use it in retrieving data. That is what is most important to us. We are not the ones going to be updating the database. Those that manage the databases are there. They are going to do their job. They are the ones that need to be able to understand all of these 5 languages. But let us just restrict ourselves to the data query language, where we use this particular data, or sorry, we use this particular syntaxes, or let's say codes, to be able to retrieve information from the database. So our focus in this tutorials will be on data query language. Now, the common words that we'll be using here, we will talk about how to use select, how to use from, how to use where, group by, order by, having, distinct, between, and then we'll look at the various SQL operators like equal to, greater than, less than. We'll look at all of those operators in the practical section. All right. Now, when it comes to SQL, because it's a programming language, most programming languages have their rules that they use in writing their syntaxes or their codes. Now, SQL does not have a lot of rules, just basic rules. Now, first of all, SQL is not case sensitive. So, if you are writing a code in SQL, whether you are writing it in capital letters, whether you are writing it in small letters, whether you are mixing capital letters and small letters at the same time, once the code is correct, it will run. Then secondly, in SQL, all text values are put in quotation marks. So if it's a string, it's put in quotation marks. For instance, if you are writing a code and the code is a name of a table, or the code involves someone's name, those ones are put in quotation marks. But however, numbers do not need quotation marks. And then in SQL, after every code that you write, you need to terminate the line of code with a semicolon. So every code that you write, you close it with a semicolon. If you don't close it and you are writing the next code, SQL will assume that you are combining the first code and the second code together, which is wrong. So when you write one code and that is the code you want to write, you close it with a semicolon. And then lastly, we use meaningful table names and meaningful table columns. Don't give it complicated names and complicated columns like some people tend to use the they tend to use hyphens, they tend to give spaces. Just use very very simple names and simple table rows and table columns when you are making the database. This one, it makes the SQL writing much faster. All right, so this is just the first part of it, and in the second part, we'll first of all learn how to install the SQL on our various machines, especially on our Windows machine. Then we will learn how to create a database. We will learn how to write syntax, and then we'll move on to the most important part, which is how to retrieve data from the database. So we will learn various syntaxes or various codes that when we apply on our database, is going to help us to retrieve data. Bear in mind, SQL is embedded in most database management systems. So if you are working in a bank, SQL is inside that software. If you are working in a retail and you are storing data, SQL is there. Therefore, knowledge on SQL becomes very very essential. If you find yourself as a manager, if you want to get promoted in your organization, businesses, in fact every business relies on data, so you should be able to know how to quickly retrieve data, how to quickly process it, and then from there you can analyze it. Just look at SQL in this case. So if you are a business executive or a business manager, or you are the head of your department or something, because all the information goes into the database, you will need SQL to get into the database to bring out the information you need. Once you bring out the information you need, then you can use software tools like Power BI or SQL to do your data analysis. So SQL sits in there as an important software or as an important language that you need to understand. It is not complex. It's very, very simple, very, very easy to understand. Most of the time when people hear about codes, they begin to get scared, but SQL codes are very, very simple. It is written in plain English, like almost plain sentences, nothing complex about it. So in the next video, we'll look at how to install the SQL on our laptops. See you.